Okay, Assalamualaikum and good morning to all of you. I'm Aini, your host for today. Sir Ibn Sunyan Berhad would like to welcome you to our live webinar on Islamic trade finance. Here is a housekeeping during webinar. First, all attendees will be on listening mode during the presentation and discussion. Then, please click raise hand button if you want to speak directly to the speaker or key in your question at the chat box. The lecture info link will be shared at the chat box at the end of the session. Don't forget to fill in. So before we start, let me introduce our speaker for today. Mr. Moklis Maizan is a managing director and advisor from Barakah Mutakim Berhad, and also Mr. Megat Izani Hassan, partner and head Islamic Banking and Finance from the Hishamuddin Island and Great Hill. So without further ado, please welcome Mr. Moklis.
Auzubillahi minasyaitonir rajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. First, my voice clear enough to all participants? Okay, I hope, if there's any problem, please tell me so that I can increase my voice. Okay, thank you, Aini, for introducing me to the today's sharing of knowledge, I would say. And of course, thank you to CERT for inviting me to be part of this program. Let me just start with the normal thing. Okay. Auzubillahi minasyaitonir rajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah rabbil alamin. Assalatu wassalamu ala asyrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin wa ala alihi ajma'in. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi taala wabarakatuh, and a very good morning to all participants. Thanks, Annie, for the brief introduction. Maybe I could just elaborate more on who I am, so that can have a better understanding and a bit of confidence. Who you are actually listening to. My name is Moklis Maizan. I'm a former banker. I've worked with 9 banks prior to my retirement. About 6 years ago. My last bank was Great Finance House. I've worked with 3 conventional bank, 3 Islamic bank, and 2 more of a government-based bank. Now, all those years during my service in banking, I was very much involved, in trade financing from day one until my retirement. And during those journey in my working career, I've had the opportunity of serving the International Chamber of Commerce Malaysia chapter as the chairman for the ICC banking chapter, and that's where my participations in the International Chamber of Commerce in the review of the UCP and URC and whatever banking related documentations were made. Okay, and I've attended some of those conferences organized by ICC in their respective localities in Europe and also in the States. Anyway, today what I'll be doing is basically sharing my experience, and I understand from the list of participants that were given to me, there are a few bankers, lawyers, except for one banker. I think that's our friend from Bank Muamalat, and of course we have one senior person here, Dato Sri, who I would say is very experienced investment banker. Well, here, today we are going to focus on Islamic trade finance. Now, before we actually indulge ourselves in those areas, I think it's best that we just have a basic understanding on what Islamic trade finance is. Okay. Now, I can't scroll. Okay, sorry. Now I can. All right. The agenda for the next hour that we'll be spending is where I'll be talking about just a little basic on Sharia principles of Islamic finance, which I believe majority of us must have done our job before this and to understand a bit more. So this is more of a review of what Islamic, trade finance is under the Sharia principles. And then we'll go straight into the subject matter where we'll talk about the overview of Islamic trade financing. And then we get into the basic products, what's listed there, the kafalah, wakalah, murabah, musyarakah, dain, are basically the normal products that's being used by banks in Malaysia, be it the local Islamic bank or the foreign Islamic bank, the likes that we have now, the RRG and what they call it, Kuwait Finance House. But of course, there are a bit of difference between both of them, which we'll discuss later. Now, when it comes to product, the banks, of course, banks, including, Islamic finance itself, is developing and looking at all those, products and how to make it a bit more palatable, or albeit, that product being what do you call it, Sharia compliant. Now, we know for the fact that, insofar as Islamic finance is concerned in Malaysia, when we first started banking and knowing about, what to do with banking, we are all in a conventional, what do you call it, platform. Until sometimes in 1983, I suppose, when there was an introduction of the, what do you call it, the Islamic Banking Act. And that's when, the what do you call it, the setting up of Tabung Haji and Bank Islam. That's where the interest in Islamic banking comes into picture. So since then until today, when we first started with what we call the interest-free banking, when we first started, skip pembankan tanpa faedah, okay, and then it goes into getting more Sharia compliant, and of course today we are talking about a more complete and if possible getting to the near completion of the Sharia concept itself. And of course journey that has been taken since 1983 till today is a non-stopping, and that's the beauty of Islamic banking, because by the day we'll find new things that's happening, and then with all this Sharia advisory committee that we have in the various department, from the bank and the companies, and also of course at the level of Bank Negara itself, the innovations and what do you call it, the finding of the better path of doing Islamic trade finance becomes more urgent. Okay, basically the philosophy underlying Islamic finance is a concept of wealth, is as a trust from our Almighty God, Allah. Okay, and this is where the accountability factor or the moral or just conscience, comes into picture. As if you were to differentiate or just take a basic, simple differentiation between conventional and Islamic, what is glaring to us is where, in the conventional financing, okay, we are talking about more closer to what do you call it, profit maximization between the parties that's involved in the transactions, will find ways on how to enrich themselves and maximize from the transactions as compared, versus the other party. And whereas in Islamic banking, the trust or the what do you call it, the conviction that is made upon the transactors, it is more of sharing of wealth or sharing of whatever profits that you gain from the transaction itself. Okay, and in doing Islamic financing, okay, a couple of things that we must bear in mind. Number one, of course, something that we always disengage ourselves from is where the usage of riba or the interest or usury, okay, in the transactions. Okay, riba is a question of money making money, right? We'll get into that later, but this is a totally what do you call it, a total prohibition, because when it comes to riba practicing, there's a lot of unfairness from one party to another, and of course as I've said earlier on, the maximization of profit is always in the mind of the transactors, and that's where riba comes into picture. It's very, if you were to get it too much into it, then the unfairness of the dealings will come into picture. There's be some oppressive, on the parties that need the service more than the one who's giving it. Okay, and of course, gambling is a big, no. It's totally prohibited in Islamic concept itself. All right, be it in muamalat or in our daily life. Okay, we don't gamble unnecessarily. We shouldn't gamble at all in that matter. Okay, cheating is prohibited, be it I would say in any religion. This is something that we would be against, in the habit of cheating. Okay, and one thing that is beautiful in Islamic banking is whatever that you do, there must be certainty to it. Okay, if you were to transact in any dealings, okay, the parties that is dealt that is in the dealing must be certain what they are involving themselves in. Okay, so gharar or uncertainty should be avoided where possible. Okay, so clarity must be there. So again, as I've said, there is a promotion of honesty. It must be transparent, and of course, justice, fairness, in all these commercial dealings. Bottom line is that, when you're dealing with a party, you and the other one, the last thing that you should be avoiding is to take advantage of each other in the thought of maximizing the underlying, call it, profits or gains that you are getting into. So there must be some kind of measures that need to be established, okay, to ensure that all these parties engaging in the business is safeguarded. Okay. I can't move it. Okay. No. Sebelum tadi? Okay. All right. Again, as I've mentioned earlier on, when we talk about riba free, it means that we avoid money making money. Okay. When we talk about the Islamic finance, or in particular trade finance, there must be an underlying contract behind it. Okay, it must be goods or basically even services. What do you call it? Back in the business dealing. Okay, it must be a real economic activities. It cannot be question of give me money and you're not knowing what am I doing. I'm doing with the money, and in return you need more money from that. Is interest, or even to call it profit. But if the creation of that wealth or the creation of the money in return of the investment that is made, it's not certain. Okay, there's gharar that would lead you to a riba transactions. Okay, so we don't or shouldn't get into a situation where you're using money just to create more money. There must be an underlying contract, underlying dealings, okay, behind the activities, the economic activities that you're doing. So there's no trading, investment in private activities. I've mentioned earlier on, no liquor, no pork, or no any items that are prohibited in Islamic what do you call it meanings, what do you call it, in Islam lah. So the main contractual relationship is no longer borrower and lender. You don't lend money, you don't borrow money just because you want to make money, but you finance them. It's more like a leasing and what do you call it, partner relationship between the two parties. Okay. Now, trade or profit and loss sharing vis-a-vis punitive, or rather interest imposed on the principals. I've mentioned about it earlier on. So there is not profit maximization, or it is more of profit sharing, yeah, in the dealings that you're in. Now, the main principles behind Islamic trade finance is a contract as a base of the basis of transactions. Okay, there must be a mutually what they call it accepted between the parties. Okay, there must be a mutual consent, and there is no what you call it arm twisting. There is no force. You know, it's you know there's a willing buyer, willing seller kind of concept. Okay, that's the first thing, and all those things will be translated or will be what you call it. Documented with the mutual contractual consent between the parties that is involved in the trade. Things that we should avoid, you know, things like riba, you know, gharar, mashir, and other prohibitions that we have spoken about. Okay, so mashir is totally prohibited by Islamic law on the grounds that the agreement between the parties is very much based on immoral inducement provided by entirely wishful hopes. Okay, so those are the basic things that should be avoided by the parties involved in the what do you call it financing or in the trade. Okay, so briefly, that's what you know Islamic financing is all about, and I'm sure you know you will be happy to find out more on the real concepts. There'll be a lot of journals, articles, and books. It's written on Islamic finance, which I believe you'll be able to get it from the bookstores and internet, whatever not, okay, and to give you a better understanding of what truly Islamic financing is all about, okay. And as I've said, you know, that is a kickoff for us to start off our understanding of Islamic trade finance, so that you know you have more what they call it, the focus on the areas that we're going to talk about. Now, so far as Islamic financing is Islamic trade finance is concerned, okay, first let's get understanding what is trade. Okay, now trade is basically an exchange of goods or services for money. That's what trade is all about. You know, transactions involving parties called the willing buyer, the willing seller. It is a contract whereby you know buyer agrees to part with money. Now this my money in return for the goods or merchandise or the services that he desires from the supplier or the seller or the exporter. Okay, and of course the reverse is for the seller. You know, they're willing to part with the merchandise. You know, they have it, they have created it, and they wanted to sell it. And of course, they will be looking for the better price, you know, better offer in the market, and who's prepared, okay, to depart with their money for the price that they've offered, and then trade gets into transactions, of course. Okay, so again, as I've said earlier on, there is no force to it. There is an offer, there's an acceptance. It creates a contract between the two parties, and for the goods that both of them are prepared to buy and to depart, okay, in consideration of the money or the payments that is going to be made. All right, so that's what trade. So trade can be, you know, done locally. Okay, you can just go down the street and start buying, you know, nasi lemak. You know, if you like it, you just tell them, "Makcik, you know how much?" And it says $2.50. You pay for it. You take it, you know, and consume it. But of course, you know, in doing so, there's risk to it. Okay. Now the risk, you know, between you in that dealing, okay, would be small. And so far as the example is concerned, in nasi lemak, what you call consumption or purchasing, because if you don't like it or there's something that is wrong with the nasi lemak that you just bought, you can always walk down there and tell them, "Makcik, you know, this nasi lemak is already getting bad, you know, the sambal is not tasty, whatever it is." Now, then, of course, on a willing, what do you call it, monthly basis, that you can return that you know, piece for whatever consideration that can be agreed upon within the machine. But this risk will start getting bigger and greater, you know, the minute you start going further. The distance between the buyer and the seller started to increase, okay, and more so when it comes to crossing border, you know, when you do international trade. So the risk is getting higher. So for one, what you call person or traders who wanted to engage themselves in international trade will have to have that in mind, you know, the risk that they're going to face, you know, in many forms, okay? When you talk about risk, it can come in many forms. It can be from the goods, the contract, the legal perspective, the financial perspective, And in a political perspective, we can talk about it, if we are in that, area. But today, let's just assume that, we are wary of that. We know that, in crossing borders in doing trade, okay, there's risk that need to be considered, need to be undertaken, and you find ways on how to minimize it. From the financial aspect of it, you can always get into the exchange contract or the forex and whatever not. Okay, in terms of the legal perspective, get your contract properly written, ensure that it is in compliance to the legal foundation of each country. Because we know that different country will have a different legal perspective. In Malaysia, we are very much based on the Commonwealth law, okay, from the beginning of it, despite having some changes along the way, but the basic concept is still there. Okay, whereas if you were to go to those countries, especially in the African countries, and even to our nearby neighbor Indonesia, they are not what they call it, Commonwealth based country. So their legal system could be a bit different from ours. So before you jump into doing business with them, and especially signing up the contract, you here, I mean, as a trader, okay, will have to be wary of that and consider, all those legal perspective. And good that we have lawyers, in this what they call room, and I'm sure you'll be doing the same, advising, your clients when they were talking about doing international trade. Okay. Now, I can't move. Okay. Now, of course, being a banker, I cannot miss talking about, what banks are doing, what are banks' participations in international trade, what are our roles in helping international traders achieving their means, that is the buyer and the seller. Number one, of course, bank, is a money handler. All right. So our job is to effect or to receive payments. Okay. For the buyer, it is us on behalf of the importer to effect the payment, okay, to the international parties, okay, through the banking system itself, okay, because we have correspondent banks, we have relationship banks, in the international arena. So we're using all these connectivities to assist our clients or our customers in effecting or in completing the trade transactions, which is, the money movement part of it. Okay. Now, when it comes to international trade, the one thing that we cannot do without is documents. Okay, buyer and seller, okay, to effect to complete the transactions. All right, to move the goods that they have produced, okay, from the exporter side to the importer side. And let's assume that we are talking about crossing borders, international trade. Okay, the most important things, to a company, not say a company physically, but to ensure that whatever that is being shipped or transported, okay, when it comes to the other side, to the other end, they're able to receive it, and in doing so, they need all those documentary proof. All right. So banks will be assisting the importer or the exporter, and in this particular case, it's the exporter, in the handling of those documents. Okay. Now, those documents, how would the bank be involved in it? Now, basically, I would say it's quite minimal in that sense, because banks are just custodian. They are the people who will be handling these documents, okay, and handing it over to the importer. The originations or the creations or the agreement on what documents to use will be in the what do you call it, the contract that's been agreed between the buyer and the seller. So if I were to give this lecture to importers, to importers and exporters, my reminder to them is always to ensure that in the contract that you're going to sign, okay, between the two parties, be clear. There must be clarity on the documents that need to be used. Because once that is complete, okay, a single document's missing or a single document's not asked for in the transactions could be a problem to the party who's going to clear those goods in the other country. Let me just take one simple example. Okay. Now, if you are trading with a Middle East based bank, let me just assume that, okay, simple one, okay, and one of those things that the MENA, the Middle East, we call it countries there, that they prohibits the entrance of goods originating from Israel, okay, be it direct from Israel or through another country, okay. So one of documents that is going to be needed to prove that that is not the case is the certificate of origin, okay, or something that is going to be stated, proven to the customs and excise department in those countries to see that these goods has nothing to do with Israel, okay, the coming directly from Israel or through any other countries, because we know that most of the countries in the world now, okay, including Malaysia, we do have a trading relationship. Previously, we don't, but we do now, okay. But even countries like Singapore, okay, Singapore, they can trade, they can visit, they have a direct relationship with Israel. So they could be exporting it to any of the Middle East countries through Malaysia, because Malaysia have a good relationship with the Middle East. But those goods could be originated from Israel. So if you were to export things to those countries, not having what you call it, a certificate of origin, would end up with those with the importer not able to get the release of goods from their customs office or from the authority in that. So that is good. So as I've said earlier on, the beginning of the business itself, the what you call the list of documents between the buyer and the seller must be agreed upon. And here again, Mr. Lawyers, I think you must be wary of that in advising your clients. Okay, what are the rules or what are the documents required in doing the business? Matrid is always there to assist, and they can advise what particular documents will be important, in dealing with any particular countries. Okay, so banks as a custodian of the documents, okay, for the completion of the contract and the goods has been produced, the exporter will present it to the bank, okay, and the bank on its own or through its what do you call it, correspondence, or what do you call it, or relationship banks or other banks that is having the corresponding relationship with them, okay, will then present it to the importer in exchange of money. All right. So insofar as the importer is concerned, even though the goods are meant for them, they will not be able to get clearance from the ports or from the custom office until and unless they present all these origin documents that is required for, especially the transport documents, the bill of lading and whatever not. Okay. So now that's where the security comes in. As a custody, we hold that, and as an agent to the principal, an agent to the bank, or agent to the exporter, we will not simply release it to the importer until and unless there is an exchange of payments or money from the importer itself, and that's where completes the transactions and the handing over of documents, and of course the remitting of payments to the exporter gets into picture and complete the whole transactions. And there, who are we? We are the intermediaries between the buyer and the sellers, the importers and the exporters. And of course, in doing so, one other role, one other functions that is important to the bank, for a law-abiding bank, operating in a particular countries, we should be aware. We should be, I would say, an expert, in the exchange control regulations of the country. All right, we know what can be done. We should know what cannot be done. Okay, so to ensure that all those what do you call it, transactions that is being handled by the banks, or by transaction between importers and exporters, are not being abused, all right, in relation to exchange control. There could be no underlying contracts, but they are just trying to bring in some money, okay, into the countries, some what do you call it, illegal money, so to speak, okay, some kind of laundering, what do you call it, process, and the bank has been made the agent towards that. Okay, so knowing what are within the exchange control regulations will assist the bank, also the country, and the importer exporters from what those kind of what you call illegal transactions. And of course, last but not least, what is important to the importer and exporter? At the end of the day, all right, they need financing, they need assistance, they need the financial support. Okay, they could be a beginner starters in this business. They have a good quotation from the importer, but their lack of fund in producing what they know best to produce, which is of the interest to the importers, and this is where the banks will come into picture and assist finance them. Okay, so again, as I've said, there'll be underlying things, and through the credit process, the bank will be able to assist the importer or the exporters in achieving the objective in that international business. Okay, now get into the subject matter itself. Okay, Islamic trade finance, which is normally provided by Islamic bank. Okay, to facilitate what? To facilitate trade. Okay, be it domestic or international business. Okay, now to the last point I mentioned about the financing aspect of it. But remember, okay, when it comes to international what you call services, be it Islamic or conventional, the bank's role is not really, focus into the financing part of it. There's also services. Okay, so the bank's role is service and finance for those customers who are sufficient enough to produce, to export without the financial assistance, because when you start financing yourself, there will be more what you call it, sharing of profit being made. So the exporter says, no, I have sufficient fund, let me just do it on their own. So, but they still need the bank to be part of the picture because of the 2-3 things I've mentioned just now. That is to effect the payment and the custodian of documents and those kind of things. So on that note, on that score, okay, the bank's assistance is more of providing the services that they are good at, okay, and for that they'll be charging fee, okay, for their services. Financing, of course, there'll be some profit sharing element that gets into picture. So banks will assist those in need, the importer or the exporter, the seller, the buyer, okay, be it domestic or international, to achieve their needs to complete their business transactions. So the assistance that is being done in Islamic trade finance, okay, is very much on the working capital requirement, okay, because these are all a rolling over business. It's a short-term, what you call transactions, for the period from the production. Okay, they get all the raw materials to produce, till the finished products, and finally, if it was sold on cash or on what you call credit terms, that is the time frame where working capital is required. Okay, so more often than not, it should not be longer than 1 year. The norm is about 360 days, but there are products or produce, okay, where the financing assistance is only required for about 30, 60, or 90 days. Okay, it's a very short-term financing, and the tenor that is required all depends on the what they call it, financial turnover of the customer itself. So as far as a credit person is concerned, they have to look at the turnovers and determine what is the correct or what is the more fitting what you call it, terms, okay, or tenor that is required by the customer for that working capital financing. So it's short term, typically it's very short term, okay, and normally it's granted for the purchase, of the raw materials and inventories and whatnot, okay, to produce the final product. Now, as I've said, Islamic trade finance, okay, we finance at both ends. Be it, as I said, finance or services, it's both ends. You can be an exporter or you can be an importer. Okay, both sides of the end, of the business end, will need the assistance of the bank. Okay, now for importers, more often than not, okay, when they are new to the business, the relationship between the buyer and the seller is still very much new. Okay, and so far as the exporter is concerned, they are not prepared to take that risk of sending those goods to the buyer, okay, and just depending or trusting that the buyer will pay them when the goods arrive. Even though using the bank as the custodian of the documents, that does not give them the guarantee that when the goods arrive, okay, the buyer will take it, of course, pay for it before taking it. What if the importer, all right, after the arrival of good, refuse to take up those goods? Would the bank be what you call able to guarantee them, to assure them that there was still some payment to be made? Okay, the only assurance that the bank can give them is that, well, the goods are there and documents are still with me as a custody. All right, if they don't pay for it, you can ask for the documents. So you can give back, you can always send back the documents to the exporter, but insofar as the exporter is concerned, it's going to be cost to them, okay, to retrieve or to find a new buyer and whatever not. Okay, so to avoid all those kind of risks, more often than not, okay, the customer new to each other, okay, would ask for a letter of credit, okay, as a quote unquote guarantee for payment. Who guarantees it? The bank guarantees, but the guarantee is more from the importer itself, whereby the importer is telling the exporter, I'm giving you this set of what you call it, a contract called letter of credit, and there are a series of documents that you need to raise, okay, and if you're able to do it, okay, in compliance with whatever terms and conditions that I have stated in the letter of credit, the money is due to you. Okay, so where's the bank's role now? The bank will be assisting its parties, the importer and exporter, whichever side they are at, okay, in ensuring that the documents that are being asked for by the importer are in full compliance before departing the money. Okay, so there's assurance to both parties. And so far as the importer is concerned, the assurance here is that I'll be getting the documents I asked for. And who will assure me? Who will assist me to assure that? The banks. But as far as the bank is concerned, they are only checking on the face of documents, see that they complies to the terms and conditions set. But what are the underlying part of it? That's beyond the bank's means. Okay. For example, if what being asked for is the certificate of origin. Let's take an example in the Middle East just now. They ask for a certificate of origin. Yes, the bank receive it and appears to be that this authentic, original, and being produced by the Chamber of Commerce of certain countries, that this goods does not originate from Israel. Right? That's take that example. But unfortunately, when it gets to the importer's country, to the Middle East, okay, the custom office checked it and it says, no, this is a fake document. That risk will have to be on the importer itself. All right, because so they have to ensure, as I said earlier on, okay, in the contracts that they are going to engage themselves with the importer. See, what are the mitigating factors? Okay, what are the things to mitigate the risk of being quote unquote cheated with wrong documents, fake documents? Okay, so that one, if you were to talk about the business stuff, there'll be a lot of discussion. But today we just take that as an example. So we have letter of credit. That is a service. Letter of credit is a service. Okay, trust receipt, accepted bills, working capital financing, all financing. Okay, so letter of credit and inward bills collection, the first and the last one, these are the services provided by the bank. That's number 2, 3, 4. These are the financing. That is a financial support. That is a financial, what do you call it, transactions that's being taken by the importer, by the bank, okay, to the importers and exporters, okay. Whereas letter of credit and IBC or inward bills collections are only services, okay, as a custodian of the documents. Letter of credit, on top of just giving that kind of a custodian services, there is also an undertaking by the bank. Okay, so there's a bit more what they call it, value to it, whereby the bank undertakes and assure the exporter that the money is due to you if you were to comply to the terms of the LC. Whereas IBC is just a normal custody of documents. I collect it, I present it. If they are not prepared to take it, are not prepared to pay for it, I'll return it to you. All right. There's no obligation on my part as the bank is concerned, okay, to see that the exporter will get this money. So we cannot go and force it upon the importer to say, hey, take these goods. All right. Because I've promised the exporter that they will get money. No, there's no what they call it, obligations in that aspect. So that's the import part of it. Okay. Whereas the export or the sales, services or finance that is being done. Okay, let's just take for the first point itself, right at the bottom is outward bills for collection, the OBC, is similar to the IBC, where IBC is for importers, OBC is for the outward or the exporters. All right, so that's the services that's being used. I don't have to explain it again. Okay, and of course, the other services that we give is the bank guarantee or shipping guarantee, and the rest of it, the bills purchase, the export credit refinancing, accepted bills are all financing-based products. Okay. We'll get to the details of some of these products, as we go along. Now, in Islamic trade finance, the modes of financing are usually based on this underlying, contracts. Okay. Again, as I've said, so far as Malaysia is concerned, from the day that we started, Islamic banking, from the interest-free system, scheme perbankan tanpa faedah, until the day that we move on today. And then with the, arrival, lack of a better word, okay, of the three foreign-based or Middle East-based bank, Islamic bank, okay, these are the concepts that's being used or acceptable, okay, in the Malaysian Islamic bank, the Murabah, Aidain, Musyarakah, Wakalah. These are the basic. As I've said, there's a few more, but let's just talk about some of these things. Now, I've mentioned all those things, but when we talk about buy Aidain itself, okay, that is not practiced by the three, or now there's only two left. That is Al Raji and also Kuwait Finance House. Those two banks, they didn't practice or use Aidain concept. Okay, but of late I've heard that a few other banks, okay, Islamic, the Malaysian-based Islamic banks, they're also attuned towards moving towards that, where they do not engage themselves in the by Aidain, contracts. All right, we'll talk about it when we get to it. Now, the examples of Islamic contracts in trade finance products, okay, as I've mentioned earlier on, what are those and what are the products that relates to it? We talk about kafalah. Kafalah is a guarantee. Guarantee comes into two forms, a bank guarantee and a shipping guarantee. Okay. Now, I think I have a slide on that. Okay. How to return backspace. Okay. Sorry. All right. So there's bank guarantee and shipping guarantee. Okay, for wakalah, okay, wakalah, the word itself means wakalah, agent. Agent means, wakalah, wakil means agent. Okay, so that's the concept being used. And where would that concept fits in? Okay, it's in the letter of credit. Remember just now, so I've mentioned about, what is the role of the bank? Okay, as an intermediary between the buyer and the seller or the correspondent bank. So as an intermediary, the concept, okay, or the understanding that we always know in the conventional perspective is more like a principal and agent kind of relationship. All right. So the principal is the party that is a seller who needs the money, and we are the agent who will be presenting it to the parties supposed to be accepting or making the payment. So the principal agency relationship comes in. Okay, so is the wakalah. Okay, the letter of credit, the bills for collection, whether inward or outwards. Okay, the concept behind it is wakalah, agency kind of relationship. Murabahah and Aidain is a financing. Okay, when you talk about murabahah, you're talking about short term, financing. It's a cost plus concept, whereas Dain, it is more of the discounting perspective. Okay, murabahah is used by importers. Okay, importers, when they buy goods, all right, they have those goods in hand. All right, they need the financing, they need the short-term financing, get a working capital financing. So what is going to be done is, I mean, you have to get into the details later on, okay, but basically it is before, okay, the goods is handed over to the importer, which basically could be said as their goods. But because of that wakalah relationship that we have mentioned earlier on, okay, the what change of hand, okay, to ensure the security of the ownership of the goods, okay, will be passed from one to another. All right. So when it comes to the bank that is going to be financing the importer, on that at that point itself, the goods belongs to the bank. Okay. Now, how is that done? Is through the concept of bill of lading. Okay. In bill of lading, okay, there will be what you call it, sort of an underlying contracts, whereby, okay, if it is done the way that it's supposed to be, the goods or the order, okay, that's been mentioned in the bill of lading is the bank. Okay. So it says to order of a particular bank, the owner of the goods is the bank itself. All right. So when the bank is the owner of the goods, now the bank can sell it. Okay. So the bank sell it to the importer, all right, for a cost plus basis. And that's where murabah comes into picture. Okay. Whereas in conventional, it's not done in that manner. Okay. In conventional, the bill of lading may or may not be in the bank's name. But when the transaction is being undertaken, it's not so much of, okay, the bank says, okay, I'm selling these goods to you. It's mine. I'm selling it to you, okay, on a cost plus basis. In conventional, it is more like, this is my goods. I'm giving it to you in trust. All right. So you sell those goods within that agreed tenor we have agreed upon, which is the financing period, the 90 days, trust receipt, whatever it is. Okay. The goods still belongs to me. You, Mr. Importer, Mr. Customer, are only entrusted by me to use this product, okay, sell it to the final produce, and then when you sell it, okay, return the money to me. Return the money for the principal amount plus the agreed interest that we have, done. Okay, but whatever selling price, that's not within my control. You sell it for whatever price that you can make. Okay, between you and your final buyer. Okay, whether it is more or less, but net at the end of the day, this is a principal amount plus the interest that you have to pay me. Well, basically, if you talk about the murabahah, I'm selling those goods to you. Yours. I what do you call it? Exchange the ownership. I don't own those goods anymore. It's yours, Mr. Buyer, Mr. Customer. All right. I'm selling it to you, cost plus the profit margin that we have agreed upon. So at the end of the financing period, just return the money to me. All right. I defer you from paying the principal plus from today until the period that you can pay anytime in between. All right. If you can make it earlier, fine. Then we can consider some kind of rebate for the early settlement. But so far as the price of the goods, it is cost plus. You pay now, you pay 90 days. That is the price you have to pay. Rebate is a next consideration. Okay. Now, dine is a different thing. Dine is on the exporter's part of it. The exporter says, hey, Mr. Banker, I've sold a 90 days, what do you call it, credit terms to my buyer, to my importer. But unfortunately, I'm out of cash now, okay, to roll over my working capital. You know for the fact that, this is sold to the third party, it's under NLC, has been accepted. The promise to pay on a certain period is going to happen because this is coming from a bank, all right? There's an assurance. And the bank satisfied with that. So the bank says, fine, Mr. Exporter, I agree with you. So exporter, can you please give me some advancement to that? Okay. So that advancement, the bank is not going to give them in full amount. All right. Because what the bank is going to get later on is a principal amount. Okay. Because that's a credit terms. They're selling at 100. the importer is going to pay them 100 because the exporter has agreed to give the importer that deferred payment term, 90 days, 120 days, whatever period it is. So the bank is going to receive the principal amount, the bill amount, the invoice amount. So if the exporter wanted to get some kind of advancement today, they are going to get principal less. All right. So principal less, that is discount, and that's where dine comes into picture. So the arguments has been going back and forth insofar as dine is concerned. You know, you're talking about here you're selling debt, you're creating debt. You know, well, we can talk about it. You know, in another forum. You know, a lot of discussion on this by dine. There's a lot of scholars. You know, in their own views whether it's permissible or not permissible. That is something that need. You know, even to discuss about it, it's going to be quite lengthy discussion. Okay, but anyway, just take it for the fact that, you know, these are the contracts that's being used by the Malaysian bank, the kafalah, wakalah, murabah, musyarakah. Musyarakah in Islamic trade finance is hardly being used. Okay, because this is more of you know, in trade. It is more of a one-to-one basis, I would say. Okay, the bank does not get into the partnership of buying that because it's not the bank's business. If the company is dealing with what you call it, missionaries, all right, they wanted to purchase it, and it says, okay, Mr. Banker, let's participate. Okay, you take 60%, I take 40%, let's import it. But what if there is a failure one party, and especially the importer, the importer, the customer's bank, okay, in fulfilling that part of it, the bank will end up with all those machines, and that's not the bank's job. Okay, to go out there and sell it and whatever not. Okay, so the most simplified, easier, straightforward kind of financing that the bank do is murabahah. I have the whole thing, I sell the whole thing to you, you just pay me back profit, cost plus profit, okay, on the agreed terms. All right, they will not get into the musyarakah unless the bank has another arm whereby they are involved in that kind of business. Maybe they will consider a musyarakah kind of thing. But you know, my 35, 36 years of Islamic trade finance, conventional or Islamic, I hardly, in fact, never seen any sort of profit sharing, musyarakah kind of agreement being done. But it can be done. It can be done. Okay, the concept is there. How to use it. Okay. So let's first get the time runs so fast. Let me just check my time first. Fikah Ain, are you still there?
Yes, we're here.
See, as I said, you know, I mean, do I have time?
Yes, about 7 minutes.
7 minutes. Thank you very much. I have no slides. But we didn't start exactly at 10 just now, isn't it? So Magad can wait for a while. Magad, if you're around. Okay, let just you know, run through you know, briefly that you know, the literature, the writing is there. You know, I'm sure you'll be getting all the slides. Okay, let's just talk about kafalah itself. Kafalah is a form of guarantee. Okay, literally it means that you're adding a liability to a liability. Okay, that's where you you know, so far as the bank is concerned, you are a middle party. Okay, conjoining or meeting up between the two parties and the giving them your liability or your guarantor's liability to facilitate you know, the agreement between the guarantor and the principal debtor. Okay, so I think you know, I mean, it's quite common. Most of us knows what do you call it, the guarantee is there. Okay, and the essential, okay, elements, of course, number one, the guarantor, okay, the bank, it must be kafil. You know, you must be competent. All right, you know who you are, and you know, doing what is intended for. Okay, and of course, you're talking about the guaranteed person. You know, the word used is no. Okay, you have a knowledge of the guaranteed person, who they are, why are you guaranteeing him. All right, it's from something that need to be achieved. All right, and you as a guarantor are prepared, okay, to assist that guy because the creditor, okay, wants that. I said, the creditor says, I want to deal with you, but unless you have a third party who can stand between and guarantees that you know, you if you were to fail, you know, he or she or the bank will come and honor your failure. All right, so that's the thing. And of course, at the end of the day, it must be the subject matter. What are you guaranteeing it for? All right, okay. So what is the failure for? Okay, so in guarantee we have okay, let's just things like the what do you call it, what are the legal effect of all those guarantees, be it conventional or Islamic. Okay, the right of a creditor to claim, that depends, must be well established. What are the things that you fail to do? All right, that what do you call it, invoke the guaranteed person, okay, the event of making the claim. That's creditor making the claim. If it's a performance guarantee, means that you have failed to perform. All right, so there's a contract between the guaranteed and the debtor. Okay, I'm giving you this job. All right, you're supposed to do it within this established period, but now you have failed for whatever reason. I don't care, but there's a contract. You have failed. So because of failure, your failure, I cannot proceed with my business, and there's going to be a financial burden to me. All right. So to recover that burden because of failure, now I'm going back to the guarantor, the bank said, Mr. Banker, these documents of proof that what they call it, debtor has failed to perform. Pay me the compensation that is agreed upon. Okay. In doing so, if the bank were to pay, does that mean that as far as thank you very much, the bank has paid, so I'm free, I can walk free? No, the bank can still impose it upon the party there to make good of whatever that the bank has on the creditor. Okay. Now, here I just want to expand a little bit. Maybe on this aspect of it. Okay, contract of guarantee is a charitable contract. Okay, in Islam. Okay, this is where we practice by the Middle East based bank. Okay, in Malaysia, though we agree, but we don't agree. That's kind of funny, because we started off with a conventional, and the thing in our mind when it comes to guarantee is that the bank would not do it on a charitable concept. It must be something that's why even when we talk about guarantee, all right, the bank will evaluate it just as good as evaluating a direct financing liability. Okay, now let me just talk about the Islamic perspective. What is practiced in some of those Middle East based bank. When it comes to guarantee, now you give it because you believe in your customer who's not able to satisfy the contract awarder, the creditor, okay, in giving them the job. All right, now you know him well, and it's okay, fine. You sit tight. I'll give my guarantee. I give my assurance to your contract awarder that you are a good person. You'll pay for it. So that's done more on a charitable oops, where's my slide, more on a charitable base itself. Okay, so that's why in the Islamic bank, when I first get myself moved from Bank Islam to Kuwait Finance House, the first thing that surprised me then was, hey, when I was Bank Islam, the fee that we charge, for a guarantee that we issue is based on 0. whatever percentage is agreed upon based on the principal value of the guarantee itself. So if it's $1,000 guarantee, then 0.125, 0.1% is 1,000. So you'll get your $10 kind of fee. Okay, but if it's a 1 million, then 0.1% you get 1,000. So the value of the fee is very much determined from the tariff that have been established by the bank based on the conventional perspective. So previously we have institutional banks, okay, tariff. So we use that. But from the Islamic perspective, because of the charitable concept behind it, okay, now you would only what do you call it, charge the what do you call your customer based on the work done fee. Okay, so the fee imposed are for the administrative costs and services. All right. So for you in business, I'm sure every transaction, so you're talking about, the activity-based costing, you will see that, from your driver, from your parking, from your rental until your CEO's salary, there's cost attached to it. All right. So for you to produce this guarantee, the customer needs to use your service, and for you to deliver that service, you need all these supports, as I've said, from the driver until your CEO, because that is the what they call it, cost that you incur to do the business, and then the fee or the fee that need to be paid is based on the work done. Who needs to, I mean, it's not your driver involved in doing the guarantee, but without your driver, without your CEO, you will not be there and you'll not be able to produce it. So there's activities involved, and the fee that you're going to charge your customer is based on that. So it's a more of a transaction based. All right. So whether you're issuing $1,000 guarantee, a $10 million guarantee, the fee you're going to charge is based on that. It cost me, say, $15,000 per hour or per day, or for whatever time it is, to produce this guarantee. So the charitable that I'm going to put in, okay, that is on the financial perspective, but the service you're going to pay me is for the effort that I'm going to put in, okay, the administrative costs and the services I'm going to put in. So you pay me that. So I was surprised when I started, when I moved from Bank Islam to Kuwait Finance House. I said, oh, Kuwait Finance House, even if the guarantee is $1,000, you're going to charge them $15,000 for fee. Yeah, because it costs us $15,000 to produce this paper. But if the guarantee is 10 million, how much do you charge? $15,000. Wow. Bank Islam, different. Okay, because kita ada, what do you call it, the Association of Banks tariff that we took over and followed. Okay, so that's a bit of difference between those two, right? So that's the thing that I just want to emphasize.
Mr. Mokris, sorry to interrupt. You have another 5 minutes because Mr. Megat is already here.
Okay, Megat, give me 5-10 minutes, Megat, please. I pay you. Okay, tarik. Okay, I'll go fast on that. So that's, I cannot move my slide. How can I go fast? Fika. Okay. All right. God, I've tried yesterday and I thought I could finish all the slides within that 60 minutes. I've cut it down from 100 plus to about 60. But sorry, guys. Then the wakalah. Wakalah is letter of credit. I've explained that earlier on, okay? But just a bit more, what do you call it, heading up to it. As I said, it's a wakalah, it's an agency, all right? A letter of credit is an agency, that the service plus that undertaking, okay? It's a letter of credit where the bank guarantees. Well, to say that it guarantees, you have to use it loosely. It's more of the bank undertaking. You undertake to pay if you comply to the terms and conditions of the LC that has been, what do you call it, put up. All right, so that's the most important thing. So if the buyer doesn't make any payment, then the bank will honor it, provided the terms and conditions of the LCs are being, what do you call it, compliant. Next, okay. Now, I would love to elaborate on this. Number one, let's put aside the LC based on Musyarakah, as I said, hardly happens. It can happen, but hardly, okay? But it's two commonly being used, okay? The LC Wakalah and LC Murabaha. What's different? There's no different per se, okay? All LCs, let's put it this way, all LCs are Wakalah. Because why? As I said earlier on, it's a principal agency, it's a wakil, all right? So where is the bank? The bank is a wakil, all right? Now, we can get into the details, but, unfortunately, time doesn't permit us. But take it on the surface of it. All LCs are wakalah. All right. Now, because of that confusion, some banks would put it this way. Okay, let's put the difference. LC Wakalah is where the bank only acts as an agent. Okay, there is no what do you call it, financing requirement by the customer after the goods has arrived. So we call it LC Wakalah. The customer wants a requirement or wants financing, then we call it LC Murabah. Okay, so that is just more of a to ease the understanding what the customer wants. So the customer says, I just want you to give me the service. I say LC Wakalah. That being the case, you give me 100% a deposit. So that, okay, when the documents arrive, I don't have to bother telling you, say, hey, we have to get the financing. You said, I don't have any money, and it's okay. Oh, now we have to talk about financing. And of course, to create a financing facilities and this kind of things, it's not a 1 or 2 days job, right? So it requires a lot of credit assessment. So if the customer says, okay, I just want your service, I give 100% commission, we call it LC Wakalah. Okay, but the customer says, okay, well, I need a financing through the Wakalah concept, then we call it LC Murabah. Fine. So, but the best way to say it is actually LC Wakalah Murabah or LC Wakalah full stop. All right. But all LCs are Wakalah. The financing will then determine whether it's Murabah, Musyarakah, or whatever other concept that you want to use, for the financing perspective. Okay. So that's move my slide. Okay. Now, briefly, I've mentioned about this earlier on. What is the bank's job? Okay, the bank will act as an agent or intermediary between the buyer and the seller. Okay, inform the bank of the LC, that requirement, and what I need to be what you call committed. It's documents related. They must be in compliance and whatever not. Okay, so the customer, Wakalah, as I said, they need to put a full deposit. Okay, for the goods and its purchase. Okay, now let's just I got to steal this time to mention it. Okay, when you talk about Wakalah, okay, in the LC concept, there's two kind of Wakalah that existed here. Number one is Wakalah, an agent to pay. Okay. Number two, an agent to buy. So when you appoint the bank as an agent, the importer appoints the bank an agent and says, okay, Mr. Bank, I need to buy a machine. You appoint the bank as an agent. Okay. You're appointing the bank in two forms. Agent to do what? To pay. Agent to do what? To purchase. But the bank is not involved in the business of buying the machine that you want. Before you get into that business, Mr. Importer, Exporter, you have already agreed upon, say, I want this particular machine with all the specs and whatever not. So now the bank is prepared to do so, okay, to assist you as a wakil. But the bank says, I'm not prepared to be your wakil to purchase. What I do now, I appoint you bank. So what the bank will do, the bank will appoint, okay, the the customer to be the bank's agent now. It's sort of a reverse role. Okay, now you go and buy those goods on my behalf. So when the importer purchases those goods, the goods will be on the bank's behalf and it will be in the bank's name. When it gets into the bank's name, and that's what I've mentioned earlier on, the Murabah can take into picture. So that is the beauty of Islamic banking. The rule is established. Who does what and for whom. All right, so that's important. So in conventional, sometimes we just leave it to be assumed. Okay, the bank issue the LC gets here, and the customer is good. You know, at the end of the day, if that thing goes wrong, we miss the customer. I finance you. These are all the securities. I recover my loss from the security. In Islamic banking, securities is a second way or a final way out. First, it must be on the transaction base. All right, establish step by step who owns what. Okay, if there's a failure in between, then you know who fails and what to do next. Okay, so that's a beauty of Islamic banking. Next. Okay, well, let me just you'll see the slides. Okay, there's steps 1, 2, 3. This is a process, the modus operandi on how LC is being issued. From an importer coming to the bank, and the bank going to the negotiating bank or the advising bank into the exporter, and it gets into the cycle until the goods move from the exporter to the importer and vis-a-vis the payment itself, the money itself. All right. So I don't have to go step by step. I wish I could, you see, but I believe, most of the participants in here, you could easily understand, okay, the movement, the flow, okay, in the chart that is being given. Next. Okay. As I've said earlier on, murabaha is not a loan. It's not the money I give it to you, you go and buy. Murabaha is a financing. And financing means there's a sales, buy and selling kind of thing. So the ownership of the goods to the banks and sell it. Okay, we are clear on that. Okay, it's a sales contract, fulfill and cost plus and whatever not. I've mentioned earlier on. So that's why if you go to Islamic bank, we don't talk about loan. Loan means you're giving money, use whatever that you believe it is, and then on a period that is been agreed upon, pay me back. Financing means I finance you out of the sales of the goods I've given it to you. Okay. Okay, these are all the products that is being used under the concept of murabaha, under the letter of credit, working capital, trust receipt, and those kind of things. Net at the end of the day, okay, there is a goods owned by the bank, sold to customer. All right. So letter of credit is wakalah. That's why we cannot say that letter of credit is financing. It is a wakalah. Okay. But from that wakalah, you get into the murabaha part of it. Okay, the financing. Working capital financing is where you establish right away. That is goods that has been made to the bank's ownership and sold to the customer and then being financed. So if you were to look at previously, sometimes the bank will have to create ownership of certain things so that it can be sold. All right, and the exchange of ownership comes into picture, and the financing will take place. Okay, murabah trust receipt is just a name concept. Basically, it's a murabah selling. Okay, but because the word trust receipt has been used since the day we started banking, since the day we started trade finance. All right. So if you were to talk about, just murabaha, is very Islamic. A lot of customers will take aback. Says, what is murabaha? To give them that simplified understanding, is trust receipt. Okay. But the concept underlying is not trust at all. It's a direct selling. It's not goods being entrusted, okay, by the bank to the importer, to the exporters. I entrust the goods, okay, and you sell it. No, it's not. It doesn't work that way. That is not on a trust basis, but it's more a direct sales basis. Okay. IAB is a bank acceptance, all right, and of course the what do you call it, ECR. I think if you were to read it, you can relate back, some of those points I've mentioned earlier on, and that's where the tying up comes into picture, talking about the profit plus and those kind of things. Okay. Again, the same flow, but this is where the concept of murabahah comes in. Right? The financing that is required after the wakalah has taken place. Okay, so it's just another step where the financing happens. Okay, again, as I mentioned earlier on, do you need a security or deposit? Yes, if it is on a wakalah basis. Why? Because the bank needs to protect themselves. When the goods arrive, the bank has given its undertaking. Everything is completed upon, the bank will have to honor its LC. You have to pay the exporter. All right. Now it's between the buyer, the importer, and the bank. All right. If the buyer fails to pay the bank, where would the bank stand? Of course, we have those goods. All right. But are we in the business of making those goods into finished products? No. All right. So on that note, we need some kind of security. All right. So you're talking about security, it can be on physical, tangible, or it can be just on intangible. It's, that depends on the bank's what do you call it, credit analysis of the customer standing. Okay. It can just be a director's guarantee because it's of a good standing. All right. So there is no physical or tangible deposit that is required. Rebate, as I've said earlier on, if in a murabaha, if the customer is able to perform their functions within the shorter period, of course, they will get the rebate. Okay. But there's something that cannot be what do you call it, agreed upon. Basically, the bank says, okay, we'll consider giving you some kind of rebate. All right. So I've mentioned that earlier on. These two has been mentioned, in my lectures. Okay, trust is it. Okay, and as I've said, I have to mention it because when we talk about trust is it, most banks are still using the word trust is it. Okay, because Bank Negara says okay, rather than making our customers confused, okay, we just make it trust is it I. But please bear in mind, it does not work. All right, the way that what you know what trust is it is all about. Okay, it's just namesake to ease the understanding, but the concept behind it is still murabaha, not on a trust basis. Okay, musyarakah, I don't have to explain. Okay, Dine, briefly I've mentioned it to you just now, what Dine is all about. Okay, this is more for exporters who needs the working capital in advance of the committed payment that is going to be given by the importer on retail, because they themselves have given them that terms. You pay me 90 days, but now I realize I need the money. Okay, so they go to the bank or you go to any parties are prepared to advance them, okay, the money that is due in 90 days. But of course, the advancement is going to be on a discounted basis. So that's what Dine is all about. So that's right. The Dine is an intangible asset. Intangible, what is the asset there? It's the debt. Okay. So you are basically financing based on an intangible asset, based on it. Because as far as the goods is concerned, it's gone. That is on the importer side. The importer has used it. The bank cannot take ownership of those goods anymore. But what is due to them is the debt, the promise to pay on 90 days, right? The only thing that gives comfort to those who does not want to really practice Dine or have doubt in Dine is that the origination of the debt is from the underlying goods. It's not something that's been created from the air. So based on that, it says, yes, there was an established credit, there's an established debt, then we can do that discounting. So, if you want to talk about Dine, you can go back and forth and how you actually want to put that concept back into it. Okay, so I don't have to what do you call it? Elaborate it. You can understand it. Only if I have time to do it, then it'll be love. I love talking about it, but unfortunately. Okay. Anyway, let me just stop there. I don't know. In fact I wanted to mention about guarantee that if I allow me to do that on my last point basis. The rest of it, guys, you can refer to the slides, okay, and understanding whatever it is. But if you need clarification, elaboration, please, I'm all there. You can always contact me, email, or whatever not. I give you later what my email address to get more clarification on some of those points. All right. I think there's one slide we're missing just now. That's on the guarantee. Let me just briefly get sikit saya get please. Guarantee, there's as mentioned, there's two kind of guarantees. There's the bank guarantee and the shipping guarantee. Okay. Now when you talk about the normal bank guarantee, okay, though it's charitable per se, but you know what you are guaranteeing for. Be it, bid bond, bid guarantee, performance guarantee, liability, those utility, and the amount can be established upfront. And whatever fee you want to charge, I mean, you're talking about a conventional, there must be a fee base. But from the Islamic perspective, assuming that you want to be compensated fee-wise based on the value of guarantee, then kafalah, the bank guarantee, is much easier. But when it comes to shipping guarantee is one guarantee where he has no value, no meaning, no amount attached to it, and there is no expiry date attached to it. Some say 7 years, some say, but whatever it is, it not been thoroughly tested. But shipping guarantee, those two things cannot be attached to it. Okay, why? Because you are guaranteeing the shipping company for the release of the goods that they themselves don't know what's inside it. All right, so it's a container, full container. It could be just stones, it could be diamonds inside it, but the documents that prove to it says that it is a machine. Now, to release it, shipping company needs to get the original BL. Without the original BL, you cannot release those what they call commodities or those that container. Okay. Importer cannot produce it, so it goes to the bank. Mr. Banker, helpful banker, says, okay, fine, I'll give you the assurance that you will be receiving your bill of lading, but you need the goods now rather than staying at the port. You have to pay for all the demurrage, whatever it is. You tell Mr. Shipping Company, machine company, release it. It's my good customer. All right, I give you this guarantee. Okay, I jointly sign it with the importer, with the importer, to say that, okay, if someone is to claim back that what do you call it, the container from you, and for a certain value, I'll stand behind you. But what's the value? I don't know. So the exporter might be, instead of saying that it's a machine inside it, matter of fact, there are tons of diamonds. And when it comes to the real time of it, it says, okay, in that container, it's actually $10 billion of diamond. Now I'm claiming it from you. So if your importer just now say it's a machine worth 100,000, but actual fact you're being sued for 10 million, you have to honor that 10 million. As I said, shipping guarantee, there's no value attached to it. And when can they sue it? Anytime. It could be a year, 2 years, 3 years later, and she said, hey, Mr. Shipper, Mr. Shipping Company, the container that I what I call transport it through you, all right, the payment has not been received. Can you please return that container to me, because it still belongs to me? Shipping company says, no, I can't. Why? Because I've released it. Why? Because the good banker here has a guarantee. So I sue, the exporter sues the shipping company. In return, the shipping company will sue the bank. For what value? For the value that they have been, what you call, sued upon. 10 million, 10 million lah. So be careful. I always remind my fellow bankers, especially you, Mr. Lawyers here, when the customer actually is drafting all the documents, if you see them, having a shipping guarantee as one of the product, remind them, are you sure? If you want to issue a shipping guarantee based on the LC, it's kind of comfortable. But if it's just shipping guarantee standalone, you might be selling the bank. All right. So on that note, I think I've utilized too much of Megat's time. I'm so sorry. But that's me. I just cannot finish it without concluding some of those things. So thank you very much. If you have any question, please either ask now or email. Okay, and I'm sure my good fellow friends at CERT will be sharing all my details later. My email address, my phone number. Please, I'm here. I'm a free man. Basically, I've retired. Anytime you want to get in touch with me, please. Thank you very much. That's about it. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Mr. Moklis, for the presentation. So now let's proceed to the next session. Mr. Magat.
Okay, Assalamualaikum. Thanks, Ani. Thank you, Cik Moklis. Good to hear from you and to hear you speak on the topic. It's always very enlightening, so I appreciate it very much. Before I start, maybe could I just clarify with the organizer, how much time do I have?
Until 12:30. Is it okay?
Okay, I can try and finish earlier if you want. If I really
Okay.
fine. There is quite a bit to cover in my slides. I think I also had the same issue with Encik Muflis in terms of trimming down the slides for a 1 hour session. So the slides are, I think the organizer will share it with you after the session. But if you look at the slide, there's a lot. But actually, in terms of what we'll cover, it covers some certain basic concepts relating to Islamic trade financing as used as a banking facility by banks offered to customers. So let me just share my slides. Okay. I can you see my slide? Should be a full page,
Yes.
full screen. Okay, all right. Okay, what I'll cover for, I think at least within the next hour or less, will be a number of things. So we look at the use of Islamic trade financing as a banking facility, and we look at some relevant documentation used for the purpose of banks offering Islamic trade financing as a banking facility to customers. So what we'll cover for the purpose of the session that we have currently will be to look into this, I think, 6 matters. I think the first will look into Islamic trade financing facility insofar as it's found in the relevant banking facility agreement. So we'll cover the relevant, or rather the standard clauses found in a bank facility agreement relating to trade financing facilities. And then after looking into the facility agreement, the standard terms found that are used for all Islamic trade financing facilities, we will then look into specific terms in the relevant documentation, banking documentation relating to the various types of Islamic trade financing. For example, letter of credit I, bank guarantee I, accepted bills I, trust receipts I, and also forex I. So this will be a brief outline of what we will be covering for the next hour or so. Basically going through some of the terms used in relevant banking facility documentation relating to Islamic trade financing facilities. Before going into the relevant clauses, I think just a point to note, and that would be that essentially the way that it operates in terms of documentation is that from the bank's perspective and customer's perspective and the legal documentation, this reflects a facility offered by the bank to the customer. So that will mean there are certain requirements that will be placed typically by the bank on the customer to ensure that things are in place legally and contractually before the bank offers the Islamic trade financing to the customers. A few things that are taken into account would be the fact that in terms of the standard documentation, because it's a banking facility, what you will note is that there will typically be a letter of offer for issued by the bank to the customer in relation to the Islamic trade financing. And upon the customer accepting the letter of offer, the bank will then require the customer to execute a relevant facility documentation for the Islamic trade financing. And typically that will involve the signing or execution of the facility agreement after the letter of offer is issued and accepted by the customer. So there will always be the letter of offer together with a facility agreement that would evidence the terms of the Islamic trade financing facilities that are offered by the bank to the customer. So facility agreement, letter of offer. In addition to that, there may also be certain collateral provided for the Islamic trade financing. And this depends, but it can be done on clean basis or it can be done on secured basis. However, for certain types of Islamic trade financing products, such as letter of credit or bank guarantee, for example, there may be a requirement, at least at the minimum, to have some form of a deposit in order to address the bank's concern that there will be payments made by the bank to a third party. So in order to provide comfort to the bank in making such payments to third parties, the bank may require a deposit to be provided for the customer to provide the necessary funds for the purpose of the bank making payments to third parties. So that might be something that's found particularly for letter of credit or bank guarantee. There may be other types of collateral or security involved apart from the deposit. You can have, as mentioned by Encik Mukhlis, you can have guarantees given by personal guarantees given by the business owner or the relevant directors of the company. You may have, in addition, you may have debentures, you may have other types of charges created. So it depends actually in terms of the arrangement between the bank and the customer in terms of collateral. But collateral is one additional element that would need to be considered when you have Islamic trade financing facility being offered by banks to customers. Another matter that you should also take note of is the fact that because there are documentation involved and for the purpose of ensuring that it's done in a proper order, there will be the requirement on the part of the bank for the documentation to be stamped in accordance with the requirements of the law. And that will mean that for the purpose of the financing, there will be stamping of the relevant facility documents for the full value of the financing. Typically an issue, so it's the same way that you have a banking facility document being stamped at Valorem or for the full value of the financing. Only sometimes there might be an issue when it comes to, at least some confusion when it comes to Forex, especially with stamp office. Because typically the amount of the Forex facility is part and parcel of a limit that's given. So there have been sometimes at least issues with respect to stamping the value add value stamp duty for Forex transactions or the Forex facility. But other parts of the facility that is offered to the customer, by the bank to the customer, I think the issue in terms of stamp duty is fairly straightforward. And the stamping ad valorem is done either on the letter of offer or on the facility agreement. So stamping is one issue that needs to be taken care of in addition to the documentation. The other that would need to be taken into account, apart from documentation, apart from stamp duty, is where you have collateral, where the collateral will need to be necessarily registered where appropriate with the relevant authorities. So for example, if a deposit is created as a part of the collateral and the customer is a company, there is also a need to ensure that a charge under the Companies Act is lodged with the Companies Commission to ensure that in the event of any issue with the financing, the bank can make a valid claim against the collateral or security. So there is a need to maybe to perfect or any collateral that has been given by the customer to the bank pursuant to the Islamic trade financing. So these are issues that would need to be addressed: documentation, collateral, stamping, as well as the perfection of or registration of securities with the relevant authorities. So those are just some points to note. Simply because you have a facility that's being offered by a bank to a customer, and the nature of the facility will be trade financing facilities. Okay, so those are some preliminary matters to take into account in respect of Islamic trade financing facilities offered by banks to customers. I think next we focus on the relevant matters that I've stated in the outline. I think since we have not much time, I think we'll, and then there's quite a bit of slides. I think what I'll do is maybe give you a highlight of some of the matters covered for each of the relevant bullet points that I've mentioned in the outline. Okay, maybe first on the standard clauses in the Islamic trade financing facility. What is mentioned here, what we'll be covering shortly, will be the typical standard clauses that you find in any banking facility. That would also apply equally to an Islamic trade financing facility. So what we'll cover will be things that, if you're a banker, I think you'll be familiar. Things such as conditions precedent, reps and warranties, positive negative covenants or affirmative negative covenants, events of default. And the reason why these standard clauses will apply to Islamic trade financing facility is because it's part and parcel of a banking facility offered by a bank to the customer. So all those standard clauses that you find for banking facilities will also equally apply to Islamic trade financing offered by a bank to a customer. So what we'll cover shortly will be some of these typical clauses that you find in facility agreements that would also apply equally to an Islamic trade financing facility offered by a bank to a customer. Okay, maybe first, I think what you find in this slide will be clauses relating to availability. Simply put, these are certain things that the bank wants to have in place before the bank makes the facility available to the customer. So actually, before the bank allows the letter of credit to be issued, for example, to a customer or other person to a customer's request, then the bank will want to make sure that the requirements for availability and conditions precedent would be satisfied. If you look at the clause in particular, the focus is on conditions precedent. Conditions precedent is basically things that the bank will want the customer to do or to ensure to have been done before the bank allows the customer to use any of the facilities that are offered to the customer. So these are conditions precedent, and what is stated in this clause is that the customer, the facility will only be made available to the customer once the bank is satisfied that the conditions precedent have been complied with. So conditions precedent is a requirement before the bank allows the customer to make use of the facility. There is also the provision that if there's no non-fulfillment of conditions precedent, the bank will not allow the customer to make use of the facility. And in addition, under clause 3.3, as stated in the sample, what it provides is that the conditions precedent is something that the bank may have a discussion whether to waive some or to allow, to require all to be complied with. So under 3.3, as stated here, the bank is given the discretion whether they want to make sure that customers satisfy all of the conditions precedent, or in certain specific instances, exceptional situations, the bank may agree to waive some of these conditions precedent. What are these conditions precedent? Maybe I'll just skip to some slides and look at what are the typical conditions precedent. Okay, that's listed. Let me see here, I think. Yeah. Okay, these are the conditions precedent that's typically found. Basically, again, as mentioned, conditions precedents are things that the customer need to do or need to comply with or need to fulfill before the bank allows the customer to make use of any of the facilities given by the bank under the facility agreement or under the letter of offer. In particular, what is listed here will be the typical type of conditions precedent that's required usually by banks. I think if you look at number one, this requires that the customer completes and executes all relevant documentation. Number two is relating to, it doesn't apply for Islamic trade financing, maybe for others, but this is a typical one inserted, so it may not be required for the purpose of trade financing. This question of interest to land, which is more relevant for land matters. But what you find is that the conditions precedent are typically in standard form, usually inserted either in the letter of offer or the first agreement, either as a schedule or in the main body of the letter of offer or the first agreement. And typically, it's a generic type of conditions precedent. Some may be applicable, some may not. Sometimes the bank will customize and take out the relevant the things that are not relevant. Sometimes it's just generic and it's included for all types of facilities, including Islamic trade financing. So for example, in this sample, number two appears even for Islamic trade financing, but it doesn't really apply because you don't really have a real estate being subject of the financing or subject to a collateral for the financing. So number one is typical, where you have key documents that need to be completed and executed. Another condition precedent that's listed here would be the need to do the necessary filing with the Companies Commission relating to the collateral. Other things that are related here, this next slide also deals with conditions precedent, and this would be things such as insolvency search being done on the customer, which is a typical verification done on the status of the customer, done by the lawyers for the bank. Then number five would be another condition precedent, which is to make sure that if there's any approvals required from authorities or any government bodies, then such approval is obtained by the customer. Number six would be if the customer is subjected to any for bank negara exchange control requirements, then that particular requirement has been complied with. And then this next conditions precedent listed here would be certain documents that are required before the bank allows the customer to use the facility. What is listed here would be your typical your company corporate documents or filings that will need to be given to the bank. Also, a copy of the for corporate customers, a copy of the resolution of the board of directors relating to the facility, acceptance of the facility, execution of documentation. Also, additional other documents that are required, such as the utilization for the relevant facility, a utilization notice, requirement in terms of confirmation by customer that there will be no changes to its financial condition. So again, item 7 here deals with certain things that are required from the customer in terms of documentation before the bank releases or allows the customer to make use of the facility. Then you have certain requirements in this next slide relating to insurance, in relation to the opening of relevant accounts under 10 and number 8. So 8 relates to insurance or takaful, 10 is relating to opening the relevant accounts. And then under 11 would be the relevant documents as may be required. These are very broadly stated. Any other terms or any condition precedent that may be imposed. So these are samples of things that the customer need to do before the bank allows the customer to make use of the facility, and these are normally called the conditions precedent. Okay, so going back to this, so conditions precedent will be certain things that the customer is required to do before the bank allows the customer to make use of the facility. In addition, apart from conditions precedent, there's also provision on utilization. And this clause, the sample that's stated here, would just say that before the bank allows for the customer to make use of the facility, then there is certain things that the customer needs to do in addition to the conditions precedent. In addition to the conditions precedent, for example, a confirmation on these various things, A to F. These are just something that need to be given by the bank, or by the customer to the bank, and typically is found in the utilization notice or the utilization notice that is issued by the customer, where the customer requests for the use of one or more of the relevant trade financing facilities given by the bank to the customer. So before the bank, for example, before the customer utilizes the LC facility, the customer would need to issue a utilization or a notice or a request to the bank to utilize the LC facility. So in this notice given to the by the customer to the bank, there's a need for the customer to confirm all these details. Basically saying that the customer is fine, no issue with the customer, no event of default, no problem with the bank giving the particular releasing the facility to the customer or allowing the customer to utilize the facility. So this needs to be confirmed by the customer by way of the utilization notice or the request, and pursuant to this being given by the customer to the bank can then allow the customer to utilize the facility. So again, this clause deals with the provision in the facility agreement dealing with utilization. So something that the customer has to confirm typically before, by way of a utilization notice, before the bank allows the customer to make use of the facility. Then you have in the next few slides, reps and warranties, or representations and warranties. These are essentially the customer telling the bank that they are who they are, that they are able to enter into the facility, no problem for them to enter into the facility. So these are things that the bank will rely on in respect of what is stated by the customer before the bank allows the customer to make use of the facility. So the understanding is that the customer is who they say they are credible, they don't have an issue with accepting the facility, there's no issue with respect to the financing given, there's no issue with respect to the collateral given. So, and all these confirmations or representations or promises, as it were, are given by the customer as part and parcel of the representations and warranties given by the customer before, upfront, before the bank is comforted, so that the bank is comforted in allowing the customer to use the facility. So what you find in terms of the representation and warranties will be basically the customer saying that everything is okay, we are who we say we are, no issue for us to accept the facility, to execute the documents, to provide the collateral, no issue with our obligation to make payment to you. So all this will be stated in the representation and warranties clause in the facility agreement. So examples of the representation warranties are stated here and also in the next few slides. So here, for example, there's a representation and warranty given by customer that saying that since they are a company, that they are validly incorporated, they have full power over their assets and goods, they can carry out the facility, they can, so that's under A. So they're saying that they are who they say they are, and they are validly established under the Companies Act. Under B, it says that they can perform their obligations under the facility agreement and other documentation relating to the facility. C, it just says that the facility, once executed and signed, entered into, will be valid and binding on the customer and enforceable against the customer. So these are things that the customer are promising or telling the bank that say, look, we are who we say we are. It's fine for you to deal with us, and we have given these warranties on the basis that you rely on us, on our representations in giving the facility. So that means that at any time, the representation and warranties would need to be valid at all times during the tenure of the facility. So this next slide also deals with further examples of this representation given by the customer. That documentation under D, documentation if given or executed will not exceed their powers, for example. Under E, you don't need to get further approval or consent, or rather we don't need to get further approval or consent before we take the facility from you, the bank. And then so on. I think these are just examples of things that customers saying that they are fine, they are credible, they are able to undertake their obligations under the facility. There will be no issue with respect to them taking up the facility, offering the collateral, and being subject to the obligations under the facility agreement. Okay, so there are quite a bit of examples. I'm just giving you the sample of the type of representation warranties that are contained in the facility agreement. So that's quite a lot. I'll just leave it for you to maybe to look at it maybe later. Okay. Okay, so those are representation warranties, and it's inserted as part of facility agreement to provide comfort to the bank that the customer is credible, customer is able to enter into the relevant facility and provide the collateral security, and will be able to comply with their relevant obligations as contained in the facility agreement and also the letter of offer and other documentation relating to the facility. So representation warranties is an important part of the facility agreement. The other part that's important in the facility agreement that is part of the standard clause will be what is stated here, and that will be the undertakings or covenants. Sometimes called undertakings, sometimes called covenants, sometimes called negative positive covenants, or sometimes called affirmative negative covenants, sometimes called affirmative negative undertakings. But basically, it all relates to the same thing, and that is basically what the customer is doing here, and or what the customer is stating here in this clause will be that if the bank gives me the facility, then I promise I will do this, and I promise not to do this. That's basically the gist of an undertaking or a covenant clause in the facility agreement. Is a promise on the part of the customer that if the facility is given, if the customer is subject to the facility, then the customer promises that it will do certain things, and the customer also promises to the bank that it will not do certain things. So among the things that the customer will promise to do will be, if you look at it, will be in terms of payment, for example. So that's typically one clause that will also be that the company to pay. But what you see in this slide will be certain other promises that are covering not just company to pay, but other requirements. For example, here this clause talks about ranking. Ranking means simply the question of what happens if there's an obligation to pay. Obviously, there will be obligation to pay by the customer to the bank under the facility. So what it says here with respect to ranking is that if the customer promises that if it were to be given the facility, then any debt obligation that is owed to the bank will be at least at the same level as other secured creditors or the unsecured creditors at the very minimum. So that's if you look at the particular provision, it talks about ranking pari passu. Basically, it means that if customer takes up the facility, bank gives the facility, customer has to pay the bank under the facility, then this obligation to pay the bank will be at the same level, at least at the same level as the uh, creditor obligations, or with this, the bank will be at the same level in terms of creditors at the very minimum as the unsecured creditors. So it shouldn't be below that. It can be higher than that. It can be unsecured. It can be higher than in terms of ranking from unsecured creditors. And that would apply if there's a security provided by the customer to the bank. But at least at the very bare minimum, the ranking of the bank as far as being a creditor of the customer will be at least at the minimum level, at the same level as an unsecured creditor. So these are one positive covenant or affirmative undertaking that's given under this slide. There's others relating to account preparation under this slide, which means that if the customer is a business concern or a company, then there are certain promises that the customer will make to the bank relating to the financial statements. And typically, there will be a requirement that the financial statements will need to be given to the bank. Okay, there's also provision on information. Any information relating to financial will also need to be given to the bank under item C here. Under item D would be a promise on the part of the bank or the customer to the bank that if there's any approval to be obtained, that they will be obtained by the customer in a timely manner. There's also other covenants relating to license, that the customer will continue any licenses that is subject to. If there's any default, customer will let the bank know. And if access, if any with respect to its books and accounts or records on business, customer will allow the bank to inspect such records. Insurance, customer to maintain insurance against or takaful against its assets. Appoint auditors. Any changes, adverse changes to its financial or legal position, it will be the customer will inform the bank of such changes. And other requirements generally with respect to affirmative or positive covenants. So again, these are things that the customer promises that the customer will do once the customer is given the facility. All right. Okay, there's also this one, the one I mentioned just now, as payment of indebtedness. So this is important for the bank. Basically, the customer says that whatever that we have to pay to you under the facility, we will pay. That's our promise to you. And that's part and parcel, a typical part of the positive covenant or affirmative undertaking given by the bank to the customer, given by the customer to the bank. Okay, so those are samples of the positive covenants, things the customer will promise to do. Next would be the things that the customer promises not to do, and this will be contained in the negative covenant or negative undertaking. So usually these things that will be adverse to the bank, the customer promises that the customer will not do anything that is adverse to the bank or the bank's interest, or that will be adverse to the facility given by the bank. So for example, you have this provision on negative pledge, which means that the customer cannot create any other security over the assets of the customer, other than what is permitted by the bank or permitted under the facility agreement. There's another one here relating to financing. So they can't obtain any facilities or financing from the directors, shareholders, or related companies. They shouldn't change in the next slide. Another example of negative covenant will be share capital. They shouldn't reduce share capital. They shouldn't change their memorandum and articles of association or constitution. They shouldn't incur any liability other than the relevant liabilities under the facility and any other commercial obligations that they have entered into as part of their ordinary business. And other examples of negative covenants are also listed here. So again, these are things that basically the customer is telling the bank that if you give me the facility, I promise not to do anything that will be adverse to the bank's interest, or they will be adverse to the customer's obligations under the facility. So those are examples of negative covenants and positive covenants, things that the customer promises to do or not to do. The next clause that will be relevant in the facility agreement will be the events of default. These are basically things that allow the bank to proceed against the customer or to terminate the facility and proceed against the customer for whatever amount will be outstanding. So this would allow, this is typically inserted in order to provide comfort to the bank that in case anything bad happens, the bank can take the necessary action, terminate the facility, and require the customer to make all necessary outstanding payments under the facility. So what you have is typically a list of events that would allow the bank to take action against the customer. So non-payment is a typical one where customer fails to make payment under facility, then that's a ground for event of default. Others would be breach of obligations, misrepresentation, disposal of asset, customer stopping, not continuing its business, cross default, and so on. So these are a list of things that basically things that may that will adversely affect the customer, that would adversely affect its customer's obligation to fulfill its obligations under the agreement, or it can relate to things where customer fails to make payment under the facility. Then based on all these negative situations or circumstances, the bank can take action to terminate the facility and then enforce its claim against the customer. So this will be, all of these circumstances and events will be included in the events of default clause. All right. Okay, so that's the event of default clause. Conditions precedent, we've seen this earlier as well when we talk about availability and conditions precedent at the beginning when we discuss the facility agreement. Okay, so those are just, again, what we've covered just now will be some of the provisions found in the facility agreement, and these are standard clauses that apply between the bank and the customer under the agreement, because the Islamic trade financing facility is a banking facility. So things relating to conditions precedent, things such as relating to representation and warranties, covenants, events of default, all these are included as part and parcel of the standard terms in the facility agreement, and would need to be in place before the bank provides or makes available the facility to the customer. Okay, so those are just some things relating to facility agreement. Next, I think we look into some provisions that are found in the relevant facility documentation for letter of credit. I won't go into what is letter of credit. I think Encik Mukhlis have gone through this earlier. This is a sample letter of credit that's issued, but typically this is issued pursuant to the bank giving the issuing or allowing the customer utilization of the letter of credit. You see some elements relating to the advising bank, the issuing bank, the need, the particular conditions for the purpose of the letter of credit being issued. So this is just a sample of the letter of credit issued. One point that you should take note of is that when you look at the actual letter of credit, even for an Islamic letter of credit, it doesn't describe anything relating to the Islamic Sharia compliant nature of the letter of credit in the letter of credit document itself. It's not found. It's just, if you look at it from the seller or importer's perspective, or a seller or exporter's perspective, or even from the advising or negotiating bank perspective, it is a standard form letter of credit, whether conventional Islamic. So the actual letter of credit itself, instrument, is doesn't say anything about the fact that the underlying structure is Sharia compliant. For that, you have to look into the actual terms of the facility agreement and the letter of offer. But in terms of the actual letter of credit instrument issued itself, it's neither here nor there in terms of Sharia compliance. I think the reason for that is because LC is subject to certain requirements under international trade law. So because of that, the format has been prescribed. And as such, the letter of credit would be in a standard format that is issued. Okay? But in terms of the Islamic underlying structure, that we found that will be more described in the letter of offer as well as the facility agreement. I think this describes the letter of credit structure based on I think just generally, it's not based on any particular Islamic structure, but this is the type of structure that's used for LC generally. I think this is also looked at by Encik Mukhlis earlier. In terms of Sharia structure, as mentioned by Encik Mukhlis, there's three main types that can be used. It could be wakalah, it could be murabaha, it could be musyarakah, but musyarakah is not very popular. Wakalah and murabaha is more popular in terms of the underlying structure for the letter of credit. I think I'll just skip in terms of the application because that's also dealt with by Encik Mukhlis earlier. Maybe I'll just focus on the terms relating to the LC as found in the relevant documentation for the facility. Typically, as mentioned earlier, if you recall, for a banking facility, the terms relating to the facility are found in the letter of offer, because letter of offer is the first document relating to the facility. Letter of offer is issued by the bank to the customer. Customer accepts the letter of offer, and after the letter of offer is accepted by the customer, the bank and the customer will then execute the facility agreement. So typically, the letter of offer will contain most of the terms relating to the facility of the relevant trade financing facility. And this will be further expanded in the facility agreement that will be later executed between the bank and the customer after the customer accepts the letter of offer. So letter of offer, the terms are usually is much brief, much shorter compared to the facility agreement. Facility agreement is much more comprehensive. Letter of offer typically focuses on the particular facility that's offered by the bank to the customer, and maybe an inclusion of some of the relevant terms and conditions, the standard terms and conditions, but the details are typically found, or further details are typically found, or more comprehensive detail relating to the contractual obligations and rights and obligations of the parties. The further details are found in the facility agreement. So when we look at letter of facility or the letter of credit terms, I think what we'll cover would be the terms found in the letter of offer first, and then we'll also look into the terms found in the facility agreement. Typically, the terms should match or would match. It's just that further details are normally found in the facility agreement, but most of the salient terms would already be there. Most of the salient terms will already be there in the letter of credit. So for example, when it comes to an LC, you find that the standard terms, the basic terms for the LC actually issued by the bank to customer will be set out in the letter of offer. So for example, here you find that the facility amount will be obviously something that's very basic, that will be included in letter of offer. The purpose is also stated in the letter of offer. Then you have the mode of financing. As mentioned, the mode of financing will be a reference to the Sharia structure that is used. In this particular example, the sample that you see in this slide, I think the bank has used the wakalah structure for the purpose of the Islamic letter of credit. So here the letter of credit that is issued by, or that is letter of credit facility that's provided by the bank to the customer is on the basis of wakalah. If you look here, it says bank appoint customer to become the wakil for the bank, for the customer to buy the goods on behalf of the, or rather for the customer appoints the bank to become the wakil or the customer to buy the goods, in return for which the customer pays the bank certain fees for the bank to become the agent of the customer to buy the goods on the customer's behalf. Okay, so this mode of financing relates to what Sharia structure is used, and here wakalah is used for this particular LC in the sample. Tenure here is either sites or USEN 180 days, so tenure is set out. And also availability period is also stated in this particular slide, where it needs to be utilized by the customer within the first 6 months of the letter of offer. Commission will be the fact that it's a wakalah, so customer has to pay a certain fee, and the fee is stated here. Quantum of the fee is also stated here for the use by the customer of this LC wakalah facility. These are transaction documents, things that customer needs to further sign in relation to the utilization of the LC facility by the bank. Then there will be additional conditions issued for utilization. These are maybe include certain mechanics in terms of what the customer needs from the bank before the bank issues the LC. For example, they need to have the application form done. Goods must be under takavul coverage or insurance under the bank's name, or rather endorsed in the bank's favor. And then any issue in respect to foreign exchange loss, customer agrees that it should be covered and paid by the customer. So these are certain specific things that be included for the LC as well. Compensation will apply when it comes to the obligation on the part of the customer to pay the bank under this LC. As mentioned, there are certain requirements for payment, payment of commission and payment of the relevant amounts that are paid by the bank under the terms of the LC. So failure to pay on time will subject the customer to compensation of takwid. I think the most common provision would be to include a late payment charge, which typically will be only takwid or compensation amount. Okay, IBRA or rebate will be relevant, but in the context of wakalah LC, it may not be relevant. If you're using simply because customer pays a commission and pays the amount that is due to be paid by the bank under the LC itself. But when it comes to rebate or IBRA, that's more relevant if you're using LC based on, say, murabaha, where there's a profit markup attached as part of the debt obligation owed by the customer to the bank. So if there's some early settlement of this debt obligation, then the customer may be entitled to rebate or IBRA. But in the event of a LC wakalah, there won't be any IBRA or rebate applicable. So this only applies if you're doing your underlying structure is sale-based, such as LC murabaha. Security, as mentioned, for LC, the typical security will be the MOD. You have monies placed in order for the bank, placed by the customer in order for the bank to make payment to the third party in the LC. So that's a typical requirement for an LC. There's also here in the sample a requirement for a guarantee to be given by the customer, or rather here I think either the management or the directors of the customer. Okay, so those are some terms on the LC found in the letter of offer. So it's quite basic, but most of these terms will also be replicated in the facility agreement. So facility agreement will have details on the facility amount, as mentioned in this slide, purpose of this LC, the tenure for the LC. Here it says on site. I think in the LO just now it was site or user. So I think maybe it's because this is a facility agreement under a different LC arrangement. Terms and condition will be, I think these are specific terms relating to the LC. For example, it is subject to any standard terms that may be issued by the bank, and there's the use of wakalah. The wakalah will be the main concept for this LC. Commission, again, because it's a wakalah LC, so there'll be a certain fee that is payable by the customer to the bank under the LC, based on a particular rate as specified in both the facility agreement as well as earlier in the letter of offer. Then there's provision, a general payment on demand. That's, I think, a standard provision included here. Provision on takwid or compensation. But as mentioned, typically now I think the term used would be a late payment charge, which would be takwid. So this is something that would also be there and applicable for an LC, whether LC wakalah or LC musyarakah, whatever concept. Takwid will be applicable because there's an obligation to pay by the customer to the bank. Okay, so those are provisions on the LC. For bank guarantee as well, you have the same arrangement in terms of provisions in the letter of offer and provisions in the facility agreement. Again, in terms of the concept used is kafala, and what's covered here would be the normal bank guarantee, not shipping guarantee as mentioned by Encik Mukhlis, but even if you have shipping guarantee, then the terms will be fairly standard in terms of the provisions or the features of the bank guarantee and the shipping guarantee. This example, bank guarantee relating to, I think essentially it's a particular financial guarantee for a particular amount. Okay. Okay, on the terms of the bank guarantee, this slide talks about some of the terms of the bank guarantee as contained in the letter of offer. Because as mentioned, you have letter of offer followed by facility agreement. Letter of offer will contain some of the standard terms or peculiar terms for the financing, but these terms will be expanded in the facility agreement. So here in relation to the bank guarantee, there are provisions on the facility amount, on the purpose of the bank guarantee facility, on the Sharia principal use. So facility amount is specified, the amount that can be utilized by customer bank guarantee. The purpose is also specified with the guarantee payments for the business. The Sharia structure use is set out in the mode of financing, which is kafalah bil ujrah. And that basically means that the bank provides these guarantee services, but the bank charges a fee to the customer for any bank guarantee that is issued or pursuant to the customer's request. So it's a guarantee issued, it's a commercial bank guarantee, it's a commercial guarantee given on the basis that the bank will issue the guarantee if the customer makes a payment of certain fees for the bank's services in issuing the guarantee. Tenure will be tenure with respect to the each particular bank guarantee issued. Availability will be a requirement on the part of the bank that this particular bank guarantee facility must be utilized within 6 months. Not utilized within 6 months from date of letter of offer, then the bank will withdraw this facility from being available to the customer. Commission is because here you relate to kafalah bil ujrah, basically a service where the bank provides a guarantee as a part of its commercial service. So there's a fee charged by the bank in relation to the bank guarantee. Transaction document will be additional documents required for the bank guarantee, which will be the application form primarily that needs to be filled in by the customer given to the bank. Other terms and conditions, this will be specific terms relating to the bank guarantee. For example, the requirement that there is a need for the bank to make payment whenever a demand is made. A requirement essentially that the customer will be liable for any payments to be made under the bank guarantee, and commission will be charged for the whole period for the bank guarantee without any discounting. And then if there's any bank guarantee that has been returned, then there's still a possible charge that may be made by the bank in the customer. Also requirement that bank guarantee to be operated within or together with the LC that is offered by the bank. So these are specific terms relating to the bank guarantee as specified in the letter of offer given by the bank to the customer. Then you have here, so those are provisions in the letter of offer relating to bank guarantee. You find that in the facility agreement, it will typically mirror all these terms relating to bank guarantee in the facility agreement. So all those provisions on the relevant peculiar terms of the bank guarantee will be included as well in the facility agreement. So for example, on the facility amount, it will also be there in the facility agreement. The purpose of the facility will also be there in the facility agreement. The terms and conditions for the bank guarantee issuance, payment on demand provision, payment by the bank under the bank guarantee, provision on the payment of commission to be paid by the customer to the bank for the bank guarantee facility. Here you look, there's a reference to make a payment to be charged on a per month basis in addition to the calculation done on the calculation and payment will be done on a per month basis or a per annual basis. Okay, then the tenure will be the tenure of the bank guarantee and also provision on late payment charge or compensation for any failure on the part of the customer to make payments under the bank guarantee facility. Okay, so those are provisions that are found in the letter of offer and the facility agreement relating to bank guarantees. Accepted bills are also found, also a type of facility that may be offered for Islamic trade financing. This is the structure. Again, I think this may have been covered by Encik Mukhlis, but typically what it means is that when you have Islamic accepted bills, is either for the purpose of purchase or the purpose of sale. If it's for purchase, the structure use is typically based on murabaha. If it's for sale, the structure use is based on buy-at-dine or purchase of a debt or receivable. The specimen format of the acceptable status is, it follows, I think, the old guidelines issued by Bank Negara in terms of the purchase accepted bills and the sale accepted bills. So these are standard format provided for under the old Bank Negara guidelines. In terms of the terms, you find that all these terms relating to the Islamic accepted bills are set out in both the letter of offer as well as facility agreement. So you have provisions on the facility amount and the purpose of the facility as set out in this slide in the letter of offer. We also have the concept that is used, the Sharia concept that is used, that's also set out in the letter of offer. And here, if you look at the description, it uses the concept of murabaha, and it is used for the concept of the ABI purchase facility. As mentioned earlier, when you have an ABI purchase or Islamic accepted bills for purchase, the structure used is murabaha. Okay, then you have tenure. The tenure for the Islamic accepted bills, maximum of 180 days. Profit margin will be the basis for you to charge the here it says acceptance commission, but actually it depends, because you're dealing with well, if you're dealing with a murabah structure, then actually it should be described as profit margin in the terms of determining the sale price, because your murabah, your sale price, the profit margin will be incorporated as part of the sale price. Mode of disbursement, I think it follows that disbursement is done direct to supplier or the current account. The process in terms of the EBI will be subject to the Bank Negara guidelines. Payment terms will be payment on demand or based on the maturity date. Transaction documents will be those documents that are required to be provided and issued by the customer, rather to be executed by customer before the bank allows the customer to make use of the Islamic accepted bills facility. So these are typically the internal documents used by the bank. For example, 1, 2, 3 are usually internal documents that are required to be executed by the customer before the bank allows the customer to make use of the accepted bill. Okay, other terms and conditions, these are just certain general requirements specific by the bank that is imposed on the Islamic accepted bill facility. It says here, subject to Bank Negara guidelines, subject to an increase into ABI purchase pricing, where basic profit margin may be increased as specified, but this would apply to any subsequent ABI that is issued, because if you're using murabaha, that means your profit margin can still be increased, but for the purpose of the next murabah transaction. Another requirement here is that the ABI purchase has been operated together with the LC facility. Okay, so those are just some examples of the Islamic accepted bill terms as found in the letter of offer. Facility agreement will also contain similar terms relating to the Islamic accepted bills facility in terms of the amount, in terms of the purpose. So here you look at the purpose. This facility agreement covers both ABI purchase and ABI sale, so it's both. In terms of commission, it provides for the amount of commission to be payable, also on percentage basis. Terms and condition, this will be specifying further terms that may be set by the bank relating to the utilization of the Islamic accepted bills. It says under, when it comes to purchase, it will be based on murabaha. If it comes to sale, it will be based on buy-at-dine. In terms of payment on demand, this says basically that the provision requires that any payments to be done by the customer will be that any payments that are being by the customer will have to be made on demand. Okay, then provision on ta'wid, where because there are certain obligations on the part of customer to make payment under the facility, failure to make payment on time will result in the bank imposing a late payment charge or compensation of ta'wid on the amount payable. Okay, then you have trust receipts. I think trust receipt and forex will be the last two items. So trust receipts, as mentioned, Mukhlis, will be It's a bit different from conventional trust receipts because you have basic here usually a murabah financing being the underlying structure, and you have some evidence of the murabah financing by way of the issuance of a trust receipt. So in terms of the structure used, its features are found set out in both letter of offer and the first agreement. In terms of first amount, purpose, it will be set out in the letter of offer. Mode of financing here, if you look at the description, there's the use of the concept of murabaha. So murabah is used for the trust receipt, except that I think the point to note is that the way that the trust receipt works, at least from a Sharia perspective, is a bit different from commercial trust receipt. There's a pledge of the good in order to establish the claim of the bank over the assets. So a pledge is created in order to establish, as it were, the claim of the bank under the trust receipt. And then subsequently, there will be the particular goods are then allowed to be possessed by the customer for the purpose of trading. So in terms of structure, it's a bit of a mix between murabah and the concept of a pledge for the purpose of Islamic trust receipt. In terms of other details relating to the trust receipt, there's provision on the tenure and also profit margin that's also set out in the letter of offer. The mode of disbursement, payment direct to supplier or credited into the relevant account. Payment terms will be the terms relating to payment on the part of the customer or under the murabaha financing for the trust receipt will be payment of essentially the sale price. Transaction documents will be the documents that the customer need to execute for the purpose of the customer being able to utilize the trust receipt, and there will be some internal documents required on the part of the bank, together with certain details relating to the particular transaction that will need to be provided by the bank customer to the bank. Okay, there are provision on specific terms applicable to the trust receipt. Then you have in the first agreement same terms as well that are set out for the trust receipt in terms of amount, purpose, tenure, the financing rate, as well as the specific requirements relating to the trust receipt. Here will be question or the use of murabaha for the purpose of the underlying Sharia concept for the Islamic trust receipt. A payment on demand, the obligation on the part of the customer to make payment under the relevant trust receipt facility. Compensation or late payment charge will be a provision that's inserted because customer has payment obligations to the bank under the trust receipt facility. So if any failure on the part of the customer pay on time, customer will be subject to additional payment by way of a late payment charge or compensation ta'weed provision. Okay, so those are some provisions on trust receipt. Maybe finally on Forex. Islamic Forex, typical structure used would be based on Sorf or Wa'ad, depending on the underlying structure for Islamic foreign exchange transactions. So it's either the use of the Wa'ad concept to make certain payments in various currencies, or the use of a contract of exchange acceptable under Islamic law for the purpose of the Islamic Forex transaction. And typically, in addition to the first agreement, there will also be a master agreement for the Forex that is entered into. And one type of a master agreement that may be entered into would be the Tahawud agreement, which will be used as the framework, the main agreement for the Forex transaction. Other details on the Forex facility, such as first amount, purpose, and so on, all of this will be described in the letter of offer. So what you see in the slides here and also in the following slides will be the details on the Forex I facility terms that are provided for in the letter of offer and also in the first agreement. Because Forex I, there's one provision that relates to the application of the ECM rules of Bank Negara, and that is typically inserted as part and parcel of the standard terms or the Islamic Forex facility included in the letter of offer as well as in the first agreement. Okay, with that, I conclude the presentation. I know that we have gone through things very quickly, but what I hope you'll be able to get from this rather short session will be the fact that Islamic trade financing facilities are basically banking facilities offered by banks to customers. And as such, because there are banking facilities offered by banks to customers, the provisions found in typically in banking facility documentation will apply to such arrangements for Islamic trade financing. So we've seen that in the facility agreement and letter of offer, some of the standard terms that are applicable for Islamic trade financing. And we have also seen, or rather gone through very quickly just now, some of the terms that are peculiar to various Islamic trade financing facilities that are included in the letter of offer as well as in the facility agreement that are executed between the bank and the customer. And with that, I conclude my part of the session. Thank you very much. And I now hand the session back to CERT, the organizer. Thank you. Assalamualaikum.
Thank you, Mr. Megat. Is there any question before we end the webinar? Is there any question? So if there no questions, so we end for today. So before we end, kindly fill the evaluation e-form which has shared at the link at the chat panel so we can improve our future reference. On behalf of CERT, I would like to apologize for any shortcoming occurred during this webinar. So that's all. Thank you for today.